I think we might give it a couple minutes. Harry, good to see you on. I think we might just be waiting on Cassie, who's one of our other speakers, and then we can get started.
Mute up there.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Might have to turn yours down.
Oh, hey, Jim. Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, great.
Jimmy will have to.
And then where is?
All right, I think we can maybe give it another minute or two, and we get started. Yeah, Cassie's. I'm sure she'll be joining us shortly. Some of our guest speakers will start sort of in the middle of the. Oh, here we go. Cassie's here. All right, cool. Well, let's give it another minute in case folks are just starting to hop on, and we can get started.
Can everyone see me and hear me?
Yep, we can hear you and see you, Jim. Looking good. All right. I think we can get started. I'm going to share my screen. I think everyone can see my screen now. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. All right. Well, let's get started. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join this webinar. If you haven't done so already, please mute your mic unless you're one of the guest speakers and we've turned it over to you, just so that we're courteous of everyone and we can hear all the great topics we're going to cover today. So welcome to the Preparing for Climate Change webinar. So this is our agenda. We have a very packed agenda. So we'll start off with some introductions. We'll talk about the city's climate action planning process, climate change impacts in South Bend. We'll review the climate risk and vulnerability assessment we held last summer. We will also talk about some actions as it relates to adapting to climate change. So things like extreme heat, extreme precipitation, flooding that we're doing here in South Bend. And then we'll also talk about next steps that we're doing here in the Office of Sustainability for the City of South Bend as it relates to the climate action planning process and how we can become more resilient and adapt to climate change that's happening now and in the near future. And then we'll wrap it up with Q&A. So with some quick intros, my name is Alex Bazan, I'm the Director of Sustainability for the city. And our office is a small but mighty team, a team of two. And so my sidekick is Barbara Dale, who's a project manager. Meet our guest speakers. So we have Alan with the University of Notre Dame, Harry with the City of South Bend, Cassie with the Beacon Health System, and Buddy and Jim with the St. Joseph County Emergency Management Agency. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background in terms of the climate action planning process for the city. And before I do that, I want to give also some background in our office, the Office of Sustainability, who is who's spearheading the climate action planning process for the city. So our office, the Office of Sustainability, our mission is to mobilize the community to address the climate emergency. We do this by three different ways: illuminate ways to reduce pollution and adapt to a changing environment, collaborate with the community, and design, develop, and deliver climate solutions. All of our work, our guiding document is through our climate action plan. Our very first climate action plan was passed in 2019. And the overarching goal of that plan is to become carbon neutral, so that's zero emissions by 2050. And the majority of our emissions come from two main areas, that is energy and transportation. So over 90% of our emissions, our carbon footprint, the emissions that cause climate change, comes from energy and transportation. So the majority of our work, our programs, our initiatives, our efforts are aimed at reducing those emissions. Our climate action plan is focused on equity. Climate change impacts are disproportionate to low-income and minority populations. Our office has and will continue to use an equity lens to address climate solutions. You will see this in programs such as our EASY program, our Vibrant Places program, our Climate Action Ambassadors program, the grants that we intend to implement through forestry and the retrofit of residential homes in this year and in the coming years. And so to the right of the screen is a Justice 40 map. And so this just gives you a sense of the disadvantaged areas in our city. The majority of our city is under what would be a Justice 40 community. And so these are areas that are susceptible to climate injustices. And so definitely a high priority for us is to make sure that equity is center to the work that we do. So a little bit of background on climate action plans. So what is a climate action plan? So it's a framework, it's a roadmap to address climate change. And so it provides a set of strategies and actions to do that. And so those actions are focused on reducing emissions that cause climate change, helping the city, your community adapt or be resilient to climate change that's happening now and in the near future. So it's our office's guiding document, and typically, like with every plan, you have to update it every so often because plans become outdated and policy changes, technology changes, things happen from the start of your plan towards several years after your plan is implemented. So we update our plan every 5 years. So what is not included in the plan? Typically for climate action plans, they don't directly define or establish specific programs, and they also don't specifically budget for specific programs for offices of sustainability. So it's really a framework in terms of the work that we do, where we should focus our efforts to provide the greatest impact for the city. We're due to update our climate action plan. So we update it every 5 years. So 2024 is the year that we hope to make an update to that plan. As I mentioned, our very first plan and the plan that we're working through is the plan that was adopted in 2019. The main focus of that plan was mitigation, which is reducing emissions that cause climate change. We want to build and enhance that aspect of our plan, but we also want to have the full picture of climate action, which is also incorporating adaptation. How can we as a city be adapting and be resilient to climate change? And that is the theme of this webinar today. So this just gives you a little bit of a high-level overview of these types of terminologies that are thrown around. So mitigation, adaptation. So mitigation is reducing pollution that causes climate change. So these are things like reducing your energy use, having a more energy efficient home, using clean renewable energy such as solar, wind, thermal, using clean transportation, electric vehicles, fuel efficient vehicles, public transit, making our communities more walkable, more bikeable. Adaptation is changing with climate. So that's disaster preparedness, having buildings that are resilient to the extremes of climate. Green infrastructure, how can our infrastructure adapt to extreme flooding or rainfall events? And then there are actions that overlap those two as well. Last year, we started that process of adding adaptation to the climate action plan with the knowledge that we were due to update our climate action plan for 2024. And so one of the first steps to do that was to conduct a climate risk and vulnerability assessment. So to adapt, to become resilient to climate change, we must understand our risks and vulnerabilities. So last summer, we held a workshop with over 50 community experts on just that. And so the objectives of that workshop were to gain a shared understanding of likely future climate conditions and the vulnerabilities our city may experience because of them. Identify and prioritize those vulnerabilities so that they can be addressed in the strategy development phase, and then take steps in building local adaptation capacity and climate resilience. So with the format of this webinar will be structured in sort of the way that we had our workshop. So first we'll focus on the likely future climate conditions, and vulnerabilities in the city, and then we'll follow through with these items number 2 and number 3. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Alan to talk about climate change in South Bend.
Thanks very much, Alex. So good afternoon, everyone. So my role here is really just to recap briefly some of the impacts that we expect to see coming in the next 80 years or so in northern Indiana. And this is coming from the Indiana Climate Change Impacts Assessment. I want to recognize a few of my co-authors here. Jeff Dukes at Purdue led this effort, and Melissa Widholm, particularly at Purdue, was responsible for producing a lot of the reports that are available online, which are great resources for people. They're aimed at really at a lay audience rather than a scientific audience, and a lot of observed data in those reports as well. So I give you that as a good resource as well. Thanks. Next slide, please. Just for later, here's you can access the INCIA, or Indiana Climate Change Impacts Assessment for short. Here is the link to that, and there are also several journal articles if you want more details about how things are done. And these are both good resources for looking at downscale climate data. Next slide, please. This is what the Indiana Climate Change Impacts Assessment website looks like. So we had a common resource of projections of future temperature and precipitation, which we gave to all these sectoral groups. So for example, human health, forest ecosystems, urban green space, and so forth. And each of them used those resources then to understand key vulnerabilities and needs related to those specific disciplines. So there's a report in each of these areas that's based on the climate projections that I mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. So the first thing I want to stress is that there's really no question whatever that global temperatures are increasing. So this is a picture from NOAA of the annual average temperature and relative to the 20th century mean. So if it's a blue line, it means it's below the mean, and if it's a red line, it's above the mean. Since 1977, we have had above average temperatures every single year. So 46, or actually now 47 years in a row. And the odds that this would happen by chance in a stationary climate are 1 in 70 trillion. So there's no question that this is happening, and this spawns the statements by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and others that the warming of the Earth is unequivocal. So the issue, however, is that none of us lives in a global average temperature regime. We live in a specific place. And so the Indiana Climate Change Impacts Assessment set out really to say what would happen to Indiana's climate, which is, of course, where we live. So when we begin to look in beyond observed data and into the future, we become very dependent on computer models, global climate models, which simulate the interaction between the ocean, the land, and the atmosphere in response to various drivers, but among them, greenhouse gas concentrations. So I'm going to show you results for RCP 8.5. So that's a high-end scenario, which is kind of what we have been tracking historically. And then a more moderate scenario, RCP 4.5, which assumes that we take a lot of action to mitigate our emissions and reduce greenhouse gases. So these are run through a series of 31 climate models, which we boiled down to 10 models that are representative of the range. And then we essentially look at what the models say about Indiana's climate. Next slide, please. So these are temperature changes now, looking forward from, just around 2020 or so out to 2100. So, and the red line and salmon colored range there, those are the 31 models for the RCP 8.5 for the worst case scenario. And then the blue traces are the RCP 4.5 scenarios. So you can see that what we do about mitigating greenhouse gases plays a huge role at the end of the century. So if we can get onto the RCP 4.5 track, we could potentially have the amount of warming that we see But if we look at the next few decades away from 2020, I don't really see any meaningful change in those projections of temperature. So what the models are telling us is that there's a certain amount of warming that we have already committed to, given to the inertia of these systems, both the climate system and the human system, but that our actions over a longer period of time are extremely important. Both of those are true. Next slide, please. So those again were changes in annual temperature. So, but we also need to know about seasonal changes, and that's what's shown here. The upper row shows temperature changes. The lower row shows precipitation changes in percent. And then each column shows a particular time horizon. So first column 2020s, then 2050s, and then 2080s. So let's look at the 2080 scenarios for temperature first. We see strong warming across all seasons. So down on the x-axis, so January, February, March, etc. And you see that the strongest warming projected by the climate models is in the summertime. So that's bad news in one way, because that's the warmest temperatures already. And then we have the largest climate change signal there as well. All right, so but pretty much across the board, we see strong increases in temperature. For precipitation, it's a more complicated picture. We see very strong consensus from the climate models that we will see wetter conditions in winter and spring. So all of the climate models are essentially saying that it will be wetter in that time period. Summer, though, is a more balanced mix. We see some of the climate models saying it's going to get wetter, some drier. So that suggests that we will see natural variability, although there is some apparent drying in the projections at the end of the summer during the driest part of the year. Not shown here, but also the fact is that we have very likely we'll see increasing intensity of precipitation in extreme storms. Next slide, please. All right, so what does this mean? This can be a little bit difficult to interpret. If we have this amount of warming, what does that really mean? One way to get a sense of this is to use what are called geographical analogs. So what we do is we take the future projected temperature and precipitation for Indiana, and we try to find a place in the US that already has that historically, those temperature and precipitation values. So in the wintertime, the projections for Indiana suggest that it will look something like the mid-Atlantic states. So for example, look a little bit like Maryland, which is wetter and warmer than what we currently have in Indiana. Next slide, please. In the summertime, we see a very different picture. Now, if we want to mimic what the climate models say Indiana's temperature will look like in the summer and its precipitation, we really start to move down in the 2080s to southeastern Texas. So this is projected that Indiana will look something like Houston's climate in the summertime, which is an alarming prospect. Next slide, please. If we look at some statistics, so there's quite a bit of variability actually from northern Indiana to southern Indiana. So let's look at northern Indiana. This metric is the number of days on average with high temperatures above 95 degrees Fahrenheit. So historically, there have been on average about 3 of those per year. And if we look at the worst case scenario all the way to the right, we see 61 days per year on average above 95 degrees Fahrenheit. When I first saw these numbers, I sent my PhD student back and said, you made a mistake. Just figure out where it is. This is too crazy. And southern Indiana is really remarkable. 10 values on average per year, almost 100 days per year on average above 95 is what's projected. If those numbers are correct, we are really looking at major impacts in southern and very pronounced impacts here in northern Indiana as well. Next slide, please. We also care a lot about extremes, as has already been mentioned. So these are projections for the St. Joseph River at Niles, Michigan. And these are predicted changes in the 100-year flood, which are expressed in percent. So if we look all the way to the right in the pink and red colors there, those are the RCP 8.5 worst case scenarios. And the ensemble mean, the average of the 10 models that we ran here, show an increase of about 45% in the 100-year flood for history. So these are very large values. This is quite sensitive and is a concern that we will see a very different flood regime in the future than one that we are used to. Next slide, please. So is this happening? We see signs of this happening. If you look at the peak annual flows, which is what's shown in this graph, there's a strong upward trend. The post-75 data is 25% higher than the pre-75 data in this case. And these are very statistically significant results. It's also true that the 10 highest flows on record of the 10, 8 have occurred since 1975. And we see this one very large event here in 2018. This is so far off the chart, it really doesn't look too much like the probability distribution that has come before. Next slide, please. So here's a picture of this from North Shore Drive in my neighborhood. So by the numbers, we calculate this is a 2,400-year event. And this, again, was really unprecedented in our history, and it really doesn't look like what has come before, suggesting that we really have entered a new regime. Next slide, please. So these are some of the key impact pathways in Indiana. Extreme heat and humidity, I think, is clearly called out by the climate models, which will infect outdoor work, recreation, and many other aspects of our lives. We should expect to see increased river flooding in rivers like the St. Joseph and also the Wabash. Increasing precipitation, which I discussed earlier, is also expected to be a very significant issue in terms of urban and suburban stormwater management. In 2016, we had a 500-year precipitation event, which was a kind of a good dress rehearsal for some of the impacts that we may see from that. Agricultural impacts are very likely to emerge, both in terms of what kinds of crops we can grow and also nutrient pollution emerging from those watersheds in the wintertime may be dramatically increased. So because of that, we expect to see impacts to terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems, as well as just changes in temperature and other variables that affect those systems. So next slide, please. And I think this may be, Alex, I think this is back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. So much good information there. And we also worked with Alan when we were looking at these climate projections to put together some fact sheets, which are available on our website that look at extreme temperature and precipitation. That gives you a good summary of some of those projections and its potential impacts here in South Bend. So I want to debrief very quickly on our climate risk and vulnerability assessment that we had last summer. So we just touch on climate change impacts here in South Bend. We'll look into how we identified and prioritize vulnerabilities, which was a key component of the workshop. And then we'll touch on number 3 with our guest speakers here. So with the climate risk and vulnerability assessment, we invited over 50 members of the community to this workshop, and we grouped them into these different system groups. So natural systems, social, economic, built, environment, cultural systems. And we had them work on 3 specific tasks as part of that process. So for task 1, we brainstormed ways to identify impact pathways. So these are how the climate exposure, extreme heat, precipitation affect the population. Task 2 was prioritizing those vulnerabilities. And then task 3 was assessing those vulnerabilities. So this is a picture from the workshop. Here's a picture of Alan giving climate change projections that are happening here in South Bend. So briefing everyone about what those climate impacts are. And then that led to task 1, brainstorming ways to identify those impact pathways. So looking into how the impacts of climate change, those projections that Alan shared, would lead to impacts that would affect the population when it comes to extreme heat and precipitation. And then that led to task 2, which is prioritizing those vulnerabilities. So task 1, on the flip chart, they wrote down those potential impacts. And task 2, they prioritized those vulnerabilities through a sticky dot exercise. So each participant at the workshop was given a number of sticky dots, and they were able to place them on these different impacts, these different vulnerabilities, in terms of prioritizing which vulnerabilities are more of something to highlight versus others, right? Some are a high priority to think about versus a less of a priority. And then task 3 was assessing those vulnerabilities, and that was done through a scoring worksheet exercise. So we gave each of the participants a worksheet, and they were able to rank the vulnerabilities on that worksheet based on their knowledge that they know as an expert in their community. So this is just an example. So we were provided each group was provided a flip chart. Each system group was provided a flip chart. They for task 1, they wrote down those impact pathways. Task 2 was using a sticky dot exercise to prioritize those vulnerabilities. And then each participant was given a worksheet to then complete on assessing the vulnerabilities that were defined in the flip chart. And so with that, we then use that information to create an index. So the participants in the workshop, they completed essentially these 2 factors here, so sensitivity and adaptive capacity. So they assess the vulnerabilities that they identified through sensitivity, how much the focal population or resource is affected by a particular aspect of extreme heat or precipitation. And then they also identified the adaptive capacity, how the community is able to cope and or avoid an impact. And then we worked with Alan looking at the climate change projections to then determine the certainty of that impact here within the city of South Bend. And that was what created our index that we could then be able to measure what are the highest vulnerabilities here within the city. And so this is just a summary of that. This is a fact sheet that's also available on our website. And so I'll very quickly just highlight the top 10 vulnerabilities that were ranked in our index. So definitely some challenges that would come from flooding and extreme precipitation that in an extreme event could lead to potentially a dam failure. Some of those dams are located upstream of the city. And so if those happen, of course, definitely some major challenges there in terms of the emergency response or critical services that would need to happen. Those potentially bridges might be torn out, right? And so that would also play an impact on how do we address a major dam failure. Riverbank destabilization also impacting our infrastructure, health impacts on extreme heat. So especially for low-income individuals, homeless, folks that rely on public transportation, folks that are often more exposed to the elements, right? And those have a lot of health implications. Urban forest tree species composition. So with a changing climate, that also impacts the ability for our urban forests to adapt to that changing climate. And that also has a domino effect for the species that rely on those urban tree species for a variety of benefits that it provides to them. Economic and labor impacts of storm recovery. So with every major sort of event or disaster, there's also that aspect of bouncing back, recovering. And so that also plays a role in terms of how we can bring back our economy for major impacts that come from extreme heat and flooding. Increased inequity in public health, so more strain on potentially on our health system when it comes to extreme heat, right? And in particular, also flooding can play a role in that, and it also has an impact on healthy housing as well. A changing environment creates an environment where that might be more conducive to invasive species. So that also affects the native species that we have here. And residential cooling demand. So there'll be a greater demand for cooling in the summer months. As Alan showed, there's going to be a projected more extreme heat days. And so that has added costs to low-income and elderly residents that have limited income to pay for that extra cost that comes with cooling. And if they don't have that, the health impacts that come with that, child development. Extreme heat, precipitation also play a role in terms of the outdoor activities that children could have. Being able to be active outside and having that extreme heat limits that. And as well, extreme heat is often correlated with poor air quality, which are air quality action days. So those are things that that we have to wrangle with, right? If children are outside, extreme heat, but also the poor air quality that they might be exposed to, because it is often correlated with that extreme heat days. And then as well, the spread of pests and disease. So pests might be more conducive with a changing climate, which will affect our natural vegetation, our gardens, our crops, and then also disease in terms of the vectors of disease that might be, again, more prevalent here, or maybe more active. So things like mosquitoes and ticks that can transport diseases to humans. And so I want to go into step 3. So we've kind of reviewed a little bit, right? Climate change impacts. Step 2, a review of our climate risk and vulnerability assessment, getting a sense of those vulnerabilities that we've identified and prioritized. And now step 3, taking a look at some of the local adaptation that we've done, that we're doing in South Bend. Definitely a lot more work to be done. And we are updating our climate action plan to incorporate more adaptation resiliences. So we're just getting started here, but definitely wanted to highlight some of the work that we're doing here in South Bend as it relates to extreme heat, precipitation, flooding. And so I will lead it off and hand it off to our speakers, Cassie and Harry of the Beacon Health System and the City of South Bend, to talk about extreme heat.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. You can go ahead and click through. So that way it has all of it. Awesome. Thank you. My name is Cassie White. Excited to be here. I am here more so with my background in public health. Harry and I have worked together for several years. And I share this. This is from the CDC because obviously, because you've already heard up until this point, climate change impacts a wide range of different health outcomes. And this slide illustrates the most significant climate change impacts, such as rising temperatures, more extreme weather, rising sea levels, increasing carbon dioxide levels, and their effect on exposures and the subsequent health outcomes that can result from these changes in exposures. And so the pathways that lead to human health impacts are both direct and indirect. And so direct effects include health impacts resulting directly from a hazard, such as a heat stroke from extreme heat, and respiratory illnesses from poor air quality. In public health, we talk a lot about social determinants of health. And so that's the places that you live, work, play, worship, and how those affect your health. And so 80% of your health can be traced back to your zip code. And so there's an emphasis in that when it comes to looking at the environmental factors and indicators as well. And so climate change plays a role in that aspect as well. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. And so here, this is just some of some different data points to speak to. So heat is the leading weather-related killer in the United States. And so I think that the important factor in that, as we're talking about the city of South Bend and the factors in regards to heat, is where we can, within all of St. Joseph County, be affected by heat, but being in the city, the different surfaces within the city are conductors of heat. And so your risk is increased even more within the city of heat impacting you. So therefore you have an increased risk of the heat related illnesses. And so within my role at Beacon Health System, I'm in the community impact department, and with my background in epidemiology and being able to look at different data trends as well, I just wanted to share this piece is that where we see most of our heat-related illnesses within our emergency departments is in the month of August. And so that's interesting as we, the previous presentations around the different predictive models as well, looking over longer periods of time. And then this was just another data source that I wanted to share of the bar chart. And this is looking at the number of deaths from 1999 to 2022 and due to exposure to forces of nature in Indiana. So this is for the entire state because you weren't able to get it down to the county and or the city level that's publicly available. But the biggest thing that falls in line with a lot of the conversations that I've already been having is the trend in the significant increase that we're seeing as we into where we are now, that there are more deaths due to exposure in 2018 to 2022. And this does group together exposure to extreme heat, exposure to extreme cold, and a couple other factors that are grouped into forces of nature. And so I just wanted to share some of this and how we then use this information, especially when addressing the extreme heat and extreme cold exposures in our community, and what that looks like in communicating with Harry in the city of South Bend as they address meeting the needs of the unhoused individuals in the city. And so I will pass it over to Harry.
Hi, can everyone hear me okay? Great. My name is Harry Gilbride. I'm an NFocus Fellow working for the City of South Bend. I'm embedded completely within the Department of Community Investment, and I help Carl Hetler with creating and administrating the city's initiatives responding to homelessness. So I'm going to be following up Cassie's excellent presentation on the impacts of the changing climate on our health by explaining some of the methods that we here at the City of South Bend are employing to mitigate those impacts upon our most vulnerable neighbors, the unhoused. And some of the ways we're collaborating across agencies and municipalities to do so. So as the most immediate threat to the health of our community, we've been focusing our initial efforts on creating emergency plans and procedures addressing extreme temperatures in the winter and in the summer. To this end, we've worked closely with the Regional Planning Committee, or the RPC. This is an organization comprised of the leadership of local service providers who work with our unhoused community. And specifically, they have a subcommittee called the Street Outreach Subcommittee that we've coordinated closely with to identify and meet the needs of our unhoused neighbors during these emergencies. So some of the effort distributing heating or cooling resources like water bottles, hand warmers, blankets, and other winter weather supplies, getting information out about cooling and warming centers available throughout the city to people who are unhoused living in encampments, as well as getting information about their needs kind of kicked back up the chain from these street outreach organizations. We've also been working really closely with Center for the Homeless during their establishment of Weather Amnesty this year. That's a winter weather emergency shelter. In previous years, they had a very small weather amnesty service they were offering, but this year they actually took over from Hope Ministries and are the only provider of weather amnesty, and they significantly kind of upgraded their facility to do so. So we kind of helped them work through those growing pains and work through administrating that facility. We've also been working on reviewing and updating the winter weather emergency SOP, or standard operating procedures, for the city. This includes setting the thresholds and procedures for responding to such exigencies, and such as identifying warming sites with VPA that the city will sponsor, and other warming centers not administered directly by the city of South Bend. Training the VPA staff on how to best administrate such warming centers and things to look out for, de-escalation tactics, and connecting people with other resources. And working really closely to identify the procedures for enacting an emergency overnight overflow shelter in the event that Center for the Homeless's weather amnesty is beyond their capacity and there's a winter weather emergency, and working through their staff there during an emergency. So some concrete examples from these last 2 weeks when temperatures were extremely cold include coordinating with street outreach organizations and local food pantries and soup kitchens from the RPC to kind of get the word out about where warming centers will be and places that people can go during the day as well as during the night to get out of the extreme cold. We worked closely with VPA and their staff to ensure the administration of such warming centers was going smoothly. We coordinated with local organizations and in some cases even PD to transport individuals from warming centers to Weather Amnesty. And we worked extremely closely with Weather Amnesty staff throughout the cold weather to ensure that they were able to continue caring for everyone, to make sure they weren't going to exceed their capacity. And if they were to look at putting other measures in place, we also worked with them so that they could stay. Everyone is asked to leave, but we let them know that so that they wouldn't have to be kicked out in the morning. We also have been, furthermore, we've been working really closely to develop deeper relationships with other local municipalities so that we can act in concert together to address these emergency needs. To this end, we've been working really closely with St. Joseph County's Emergency Management Agency to develop their comprehensive emergency management plan. Specifically, right now, we've been working on Annex H, the extreme heat and cold best practices. And this document will unite the various municipalities' standard operating procedures into one document so that every player in the emergency response system will be able to referencing who is doing what in other various municipalities and allowing for increased communication and coordination of efforts throughout the region. We've also been working more closely with the city of Mishawaka in this effort. They've been assisting us and SJC AMA on the extreme heat and cold best practices, as well as engaging with a recently formed group of organizations engaged in providing services to the unhoused, kind of similar to the RPC in Mishawaka. So speaking of St. Joseph County's emergency management agency, let me hand it over to some of my favorite people in town, Buddy and Jim.
All right, thank you, Harry. Buddy and Jim, I will hand it off to you of the Emergency Management Agency.
Can you hear me okay? Jim and
we
I
can
are in
hear
the
you.
same, okay. Again, my name's Al Kursitz. I go by Buddy. My background is with the fire service for 43 years. I was a scuba diver for 30 years all over in the St. Joe River. And I was also one of the first instructors to form the Indiana River Rescue School. So water's been very important to me. And ironically, I live in the same neighborhood as Alan does. So I'm very passionate about the river and concerned about the flooding and what's going on. And I used to teach the hydrology in the River Rescue School, and we talked about a 1 inch, 2 inch rain. And now we know we're getting these rains 3, 4, 5, even up to 7 inches over a certain hour period, and it can be catastrophic. So I'll move into what I kind of concern me now is one thing that people should get used to is this chart from the National Weather Service and NOAA. And during the floods that have affected my neighborhood, this has become my go-to chart. I used to do it by physically looking at the St. Joe River near my neighborhood where it might affect me. But I find that this is much better. And when it gets up into that action range, that's when I know I have to take action and warn my neighbors that they could be susceptible, possibly for hydrostatic pressure. And we'll talk about that a little bit, or even the combined effects of the storm sewers and the sanitary sewers. A lot of people don't understand the difference between those, and they are separate, but we do have catch points where if the storm sewers get reached to capacity, that can push back and put pressure on the sanitary sewer and then force sewage up into your home. And it has happened. The city has worked to get the valves to stop that. Some homes have some older style valves, but some of the pressures in 2018 were so great that they actually blew those valves out, but they are a great deterrent to that sewage. Again, this is my neighborhood, and Allen's also the North Shore Triangle. I saw this for years. I would see it on a review of my homeowner's insurance. I'm born and raised, and I own a home in this neighborhood. Never thought a whole lot about it. Never really thought to maybe buy FEMA insurance because I thought this is not going to affect me. Now, I'm in a little bit of the high side of this flood. You can't see, but a little bit of the left side, right where the edge of the floodplain is. And I never thought that we would catch enough. Yes, right around in there is where my home is located, in that 700 block of Marquette Avenue. And it's really amazing the difference from houses on one side of the street for the other, how they were affected by the 2016 and 2018 flooding that occurred, and how it actually, this floodplain map, it came to life in a real event. The city since has done some mitigation. They put what I call a clapper valve on some of the storm sewer outlets because of some of that water from the river came back up. And again, this is similar to the slide Allen had. This is the intersection of Riverside Drive and Marion Street. There's a boat launch just a little bit out there that the fire department used to use, but you see how high that water was. We like to think of the flooding here as urban flooding and rural flooding. Jim and I are both members of the Kankakee River Basin Commission that the state has formed, and it's got a consortium of, I think, 9 or 11 counties in it, and it gets state funding of a couple $1 million a year because the flooding in that Kankakee River Valley has a great effect on the agricultural crop economics and stuff. And they're big about repairing the riverbanks and having designated floodplains and removing debris to keep that water going. Unfortunately, we're an urban county with 275,000 people almost, and it's going to affect us different. Our floodplains, as you saw on that last map, are in residential neighborhoods. So again, the urban flooding, we like to think of it as storm sewers getting filled, sanitary sewers being possibly backed up, the combined sewer overflows. Rural flooding is mostly with the elevation and the ditches and the effects you'll have. And both of them are affected by, homes are affected by hydrostatic pressure. A lot of people don't understand that. That's when that ground gets so full of moisture, it wants to push in to the foundations. Can we go to the next slide? This is a great one of that North Shore Triangle area. This was as that flood, and it had rained pretty heavy. And what you see there is water that started to come back up through the storm sewers into the neighborhood. Unfortunately, I don't have a photograph, but that if you look in the middle of that street, there's a storm sewer. Eventually, water was boiling up there like a geyser. Now, again, most of these homes had plenty of hydrostatic pressure. To the left, the homes that you can't see to the left side already had their foundations somewhat leaking. These basements, most of them, almost all of them here, are poured concrete basements. Ironically, in the 60s, a big thing was to, I guess, scare people about termites, and they would drill holes in the basements and then pump a chemical in there, then seal them with like an epoxy or cement. A lot of those homes had those plugs pop out, and it looked like little geysers in their basement, and that was the hydrostatic pressure. Again, you don't want that water coming in, but you got to be careful how you pick it off. This is how when it went on more, the flooding eventually went all the way up to where that evergreen tree was on the one house. And it was almost waist deep to cross these streets here. And it was pretty devastating. Most of these houses had some basement flooding from hydrostatic pressure. If you knew how to defend from your sanitary sewer, and that's by having that backflow preventer valve, and provided it held, a few of them blew out, or you had some kind of a plug device to plug basement sinks, your low overflow for your sewer down there, probably a high pipe where your wash machine would go to. You had to plug all those up because water is going to seek its elevation, and you can see the water even came up higher. So as it's pushing that sewage, it's going to try to seek the level of that water that's outside your house. This again is just the picture on the south side of town by Michigan Street and Ewing that showed some of the flooding. We can go to the next one. And again, this is down by Bowman Creek, another real problem for our urban area, where a creek comes in that's basically a creek, a ditch outside of town, but then comes in and starts flowing in on some pipes and stuff. Can we go to the next one? And I'll let Jim talk about this a little bit. He knows some of this story.
This is Main Street, and it was also part of the Bowman Creek area. And what happened when Bowman Creek ran over the road and under the road, everything got washed away. And that's why they tell people do not drive into water. And this is what happened. So the vehicle was lucky that if it would have went a little bit to the left and the people were inside of it, there's a good possibility that they would have drowned. So again, if you see water, even though you know the area, do not drive through it. As you see what happens.
As you can see, the infrastructure is there's too much capacity of the water flow. It's going to boil over, and the weak spots, it's going to erode and collapse. And so we're going to have a lot of damage to our road. This is, again, that same Bowman Creek. This is down on West Chippewa Avenue, kind of between Locust Road, which is, you look way down there at the end, that's Locust Road. And up forward is Carrier Trail. Can catch a bit on the left side of that photo. That's the gentleman that built like a castle back there with a moat around it until the DNR stopped him from digging years ago. My uncle owned a house out here. But again, this is a meandering creek that got full of capacity. It's got a pipe under the road, too much. It came over the road. And as you can see in the right photo, the damage it does to this. And this has happened in other areas in our county, where the capacity flow becomes way too much, and then it does structural damage. I'll go to the next one. This one, I personally know the gentleman. He's a friend. Our kids went to school at Holy Cross. This was a situation down near the intersection of Ireland and Ironwood several years ago when we had a heavy rain, and he was in his car. He started to go, and a lot of water was building up, quick moving water, and it started to float this car. And it took it and flipped it right over that guardrail. He was able to bail out and hang on to that telephone pole till the water subsided. And that's what saved his life. Ironically, I used to teach a 4th grade water safety class. His kids went through it, and we talked about, how to survive situations. And he said nothing I taught the kids in that class helped them. It was just instinct. But that does bring us to the point that we're going to have to look what these Western counties have done, and the National Weather Service and NOAA, they have what they call TAD, TADD, turn around, don't drown. And that's because of those flash floods they get out there. We keep getting these heavy rains like this. We're going to have to start an education program, probably through our fire departments and the Indiana River Rescue instructors, to educate people about turn around, don't drown. All it takes is about 6 inches of fast moving water to knock you off your feet, and around 2 feet of water to float a car going. The Center for Disease Control says the majority of people that have drowned in a flood half of them are coming out. It's because of their car. They either drive in and it gets too deep and they panic, they can't swim, or worse yet, moving water pushes the car away. We'll go to the next one. Again, this, I'll let Jim talk about this. This was hydrostatic pressure in the foundation of this house.
This was off of Oak Road. This was during the flood of 2016. Depending on where you lived, the northern part of St. Joe County received 8-9 inches. The southern part received 10, 11, 12 inches, depending who you talk to in the National Weather Service. In 2016, during the flood, that ground became so saturated, it actually took all that water and pushed it with the dirt up against the foundation. That foundation was block concrete. 1 cubic feet of water, which is 12 by 12 by 12 by 12, weighs 62.5 pounds, roughly 63 pounds per cubic foot. So imagine that ground being saturated all the way through. And what did it do? It just blew inward and destroyed half the basement. That picture right there is one of many through St. Joe County and the city of South Bend that had damage due to hydrostatic pressure. Next slide, please. Right there is off of I think Odgeld Street. Again, 2016, the ground was so saturated with water and a block basement, as you can see in the bottom right-hand picture. What it did, it got so saturated, it just pushed up against the block foundation and pushed inside. Nothing you can do. That's the way the homes were built back in 20s, 30s, 40s. So as you can see, 8-9 inches of water saturated into the ground. You're going to get a lot of pressure behind it and pushing forward. Next slide.
This is that multi-hazard mitigation plan we've been working on. FEMA gave us some money. We have to have it. It identifies 13 hazard risks to our community. It's almost done. The engineering firm that we chose, we had our meetings, is completing it. If we're looking to mitigate certain hazards, and flooding is a hazard, if we're looking to try to get FEMA money for it to do some design changes or something to handle flood capacity, they're going to look at this plan and see that we have it. Again, that's not the perfect example, but it's one of the reasons. Can we go to the next one, please? Again, this is an excellent book, this FEMA Response and Recovery Climate Change Guide. It's good to look at. The big thing here for our agency is if things don't change and we keep getting these heavy rains and we have the different risks, the heat to some of our people out there and stuff, but this flooding, we're going to have to come up with a good campaign to warn people. Rescue agencies are going to have to get vehicles. If you've seen, New York City has some tactical vehicles that are like basically built like Army trucks, but real high, because this water's always contaminated. It's got biohazards. It's got hazmat fluids in it. You have to wear dry suits. It's very labor intensive to walk boats in there, if you can walk boats. So they use these big high lift trucks to rescue people. So it's going to cost us on that. You can see what it's done to the foundations of these basements. Do we change building codes to make houses on stilts or on just a flatbed or something like that? And it's going to cost us in the money in the long run. We also do have a great stock of sandbags and blue stripe to sandbagging, but you know what? That's not really the answer. It's to plan and prepare before it and try to mitigate so the accident doesn't happen. And I think that's it.
All right. Thank you, Buddy and Jim. So just to close out the next step. So we talked about the city's climate action planning process. Alan gave us an overview of climate action or climate change in South Bend. We also provided a debrief of the climate risk and vulnerability assessment we held last summer. And then we also highlighted some of the local work that's being done on extreme heat and precipitation and flooding. And so just some updates regarding our climate action plan. So we're putting together a timeline. We hope to have a launch event. Our targeted month is March, and we'll have a landing page, a detailed timeline, And we'll also present at that time engagement opportunities for the public so that this is a climate action plan that is supported by the public as well. And so we'll likely have some city events and some workshops. Those dates are likely going to happen in June and July. And this is all with the goal to have that plan finalized by the end of 2024. So we want to thank you for joining us for this webinar. This webinar will be recorded and shared. And so we will share that recording and provide it on our YouTube channel through the City of South Bend. So if by chance, if you're interested in reviewing the webinar or want to share it with others, we will make that available. Please stay tuned for opportunities through our office regarding our climate action plan. You can visit our webpage, southbendin.gov/sustainability. We will also have a dedicated page for our climate action plan where we will provide opportunities and also updates to our plan as we make progress. We're also active on Facebook and Twitter, where we also provide updates on things that are happening in our office. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact us at sustainability@southbendin.gov. With that, again, I want to thank you all, and we will now open it up for questions. I believe we have some questions in the chat, so we can answer those. And if you do have any additional questions, please feel free to unmute your mic, and we can answer them as well. And we can stay on for a few minutes because I know we're at time. Yes, I think, Deborah, do you have a question?
Yeah, hi, I'm Deborah Javelin. I teach at Notre Dame in the political science department, and I teach on climate change and sustainability. This is super helpful, so thank you. It really brings everything local to what I teach about globally. And what I just one comment and then just very quick questions. So I was struck by, Alan starts us off by saying that our climate could end up being like Houston's, but that for somebody who thinks globally, the natural question is, oh my God, then what's going to happen in Houston, right? I mean, you can only imagine. So as devastating as some of these vulnerabilities are for South Bend, we're actually positioned quite well if you think about the global reality of climate change and how vulnerable people are in the rest of the world, which leads me to just the questions. Do we expect in-migration? Do we want in-migration? Do we play, right now, when we think about climate migrants, the most common thing that happens is people wait for a devastation and then they move sort of close to where the devastation happened, but like they're used to a tropical climate, so they don't want to leave, and so they just go to like the next vulnerable place. They're not really any safer, but they like the palm trees or whatever. But over time, will they discover that actually northern Indiana is not too, yes, we're going to have a little bit of flooding, but we're not going to die in wildfires and hurricanes and things like that. And so is that even just on our radar, or are we too busy with the more short-term stuff and dealing with that than worrying about something that might happen decades from now?
Deborah, thanks for that. That's great. The EPA actually has a product that looks at urban settings, at least, and tries to include this factor. So it's a complex interaction between economic opportunities, safety, on all these different things. So if you have a place where there are no jobs and the economy is terrible, though that's a disincentive to try to go there, even though the climate may be good. So it's certainly true that with South Bend and northern Indiana expecting to see increased precipitation in the winter, spring, and fall, we expect more groundwater recharge than what we have historically. So that suggests that our water supply will be quite sustainable. So that's a plus. On the other hand, we have these increasing extremes and increasing temperature. So it's a balance. And I think that the tricky part is the people. I think how will the people respond to these opportunities is a question. It's hard to analyze that. But I think the EPA product might be a place to start in terms of looking at what people are trying to do.
What was that called, Alan? Sorry.
I've forgotten the name of the project, but I will. I'll email you back about it. I'll find out what it is.
Other questions that folks have? Barbara, let us know if there's any questions in the chat that come up, and we can answer those as well.
Someone asked if we would exhibit some upcoming engagement opportunities at Arbor Day and Earth Day. And yeah, we'll definitely be out there representing the Climate Action Plan, and we'll be adding more opportunities to engage with strategies as they're developed, and get for an opportunity for people to give feedback both online on Together South Bend and in person. And we'll probably have sort of a mixture of both, so we can get a lot of input. And yeah, thanks for suggesting those opportunities too.
Yeah, great question. Willow, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Thanks, Alex. This was great. And thank you, Alan and Buddy and Cassie as well. This is more just a comment of an opportunity that I see. The comprehensive downtown planning process is being launched next month. And so the first visioning session will happen on Tuesday, February 20th. Another session will happen on February 22nd. But I see a real opportunity to integrate or overlay the climate resiliency goals for our community, and particularly looking at the downtown plan and making sure that the vision for climate resilience is well reflected in that plan. So I, obviously encourage the speakers to come and weigh in, but participants folks that are listening in who care about these issues and care about the urban tree canopy and how we manage stormwater and heat sinks downtown, and all of these things, public transportation, they often have a nexus in downtown. We have concentration of unsheltered people there and who we work with. So downtown tends to be a place where these policy issues converge, and we've got a great opportunity to make sure that these plans and visions and opportunities for moving forward aren't siloed, but the plans become integrated. And I guess another point of integration, it's a little bit separate with MACOG, but I know that they also just did like a 2045 transportation plan. And so seeing that transportation is one of the key drivers of emissions, it seems like we've got a real opportunity there as well, again, to just make sure local regional plans are syncing together and we're moving in the same direction.
Thank you, Willow. Thank you also for sharing that. Those engagement opportunities, definitely something we want to let folks know about. Phil, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Phil Sakimoto. I direct the minor in sustainability at Notre Dame. I appreciate everything you're doing here, Alex and Alan, and I certainly understand that the first responsibility of city government is to take care of the local people, which is what you're focused on here. But I'm also wondering what is going on in the realm of the city of South Bend trying to reduce our contributions to climate change, reducing our carbon footprints in various ways. I wonder if you could speak to that a little.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So we're definitely not turning our back away from our 2019 plan. We're not scrapping that plan. We're building and enhancing that plan, which is focused on mitigation, right? So reducing emissions that cause climate change, and that will continue to be a key aspect of our plan in the update to our plan. Yes, definitely emissions reductions is something we're not forgetting about. It'll continue to be a key aspect of the strategies and actions that we have moving forward with the city. We have the EASY program, for example, that assists nonprofits, community organizations, and now businesses to complete energy efficiency and solar projects and other renewable energy projects. We also have other programs in the mix that we're hoping to launch soon, such as a retrofit program for residential low-income housing. And so, yes, definitely there's a lot of mitigation work that we have been doing and are in the works. We did complete our EV community infrastructure plan. And so trying to support the EV adoption process. EV vehicles are cleaner than our conventional vehicles. Also supporting that as well. There's a tremendous amount of funding that's available through the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And so we're also looking at those as ways to infuse into our current programs, as well as to add other offerings. There's also funding that's available that is non-competitive, so they're not necessarily grants, but they're tax credits, they're rebates. And so those are also things that we're looking at in terms of leveraging that and synthesizing that information and making it known to the public, so that they too can benefit from those opportunities. So there's things such as tax credits for electric vehicles, electric vehicle charging stations, the upgrade of your electrical panel, incentives for solar renewable energy such as geothermal, the weatherization of your home, rebates for water heaters, electrification of your HVAC system. So a variety of different things like that. Also, rebates for an energy audit of your home. And these are available not only for residential single-family homes, but they're also available for multifamily buildings, commercial buildings. These incentives are also available to tax-exempt entities as well, which is these two bills, the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, are very historical. Essentially, they are our first climate bill for the country. And so we definitely will be looking at those through grants, and also the non-competitive aspect of these incentives to bring that to the city of South Bend. And so those are things that we've been actively working on the past year and a half. And those are things that we'll definitely be focusing on in next year and in future years. And it'll be a key part of our plan is creating strategies and actions that are implementable and fundable.
We have a few questions in the chat here. Elizabeth asked about Buddy mentioned that there was an educational program for fourth graders, and are there education programs being developed? Jim and Buddy, do you guys know about educational programs?
Hi, I asked this because, it occurred to me, I really don't know what to do in a flood. I was really shocked by the image of the car that was flipped over, and I didn't know a lot of this, and I would like to learn more, and I'm wondering, it would, how we can help more people in our community understand these problems.
This is Jim with St. Joe County Emergency Management. What Buddy and I are doing, hang on a second.
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, I apologize. Buddy had to leave. He had a family emergency. What Buddy and I are doing is partnering with the city of South Bend, Mishawaka, other agencies, and try to educate the community on things like this. If we have flooding, storm damage, wind damage, it's new for us, meaning for the community. As Alan had said, our climate is changing, and how do we prepare for it? But as Harry said also, we're working with Harry, the city of South Bend, and Alex to educate the community. And that's what we're here for, preparedness, mitigation, response organization. So to answer your question, every day when Buddy and I come in, we try to educate more people, educate ourselves on how we can make this a better community. So we're reaching out to different organizations. We're doing different things that have never been done before in this community, such as what Alex is doing with educating everybody. The same thing with Alan. How do we educate everybody? It's going to be a long process.
Yeah, and Elizabeth, that's a great question, and we are in the process of updating our climate action plan, and so these are also things that haven't been fully fleshed out yet, right? In terms of developing those strategies and actions, but for sure, I think a key piece of our climate action plan is preparedness, emergency management, and so working with the county and working as a region, and also finding ways of how we can best communicate and educate and inform the public about preparedness on different types of climate extremes. So that's definitely a great question and something we're working on. Danielle, do you have a question?
I can lower my hand now. Hi, I'm Danielle Wood. I'm at the University of Notre Dame in the Environmental Change Initiative at the Global Adaptation Initiative. But my background is actually urban and regional planning, so this is all very interesting to me. But one of the things that I'm interested in, and this speaks a little bit to Diana's point and some conversations Alan and I and a bunch of other folks from ACI have had with Eric Horvath and Matt Mearsman around this idea of thinking more about retaining more water outside of cities and maybe looking at opportunities for, disproportional positive impacts we could get from restoration of woody wetlands in places where they used to be to maybe make the pressures a little less on some of our urban areas, especially when you're talking about some of these marginal lands. And I know that our mechanisms are not set up really to do that kind of protection outside of our city boundaries, but have you guys been batting that around still, or is this not yet kind of digested by the city and some of the partners they'd be working with?
That's a great question, Danielle. Barbara, if you want to answer this question, I know we've been definitely thinking about this and chatting internally, but we can give sort of a high level summary of that.
Yeah, definitely. We're very interested. So for those of whom aren't necessarily aware, we've got a big St. Joseph River Basin watershed, and we are the southern bend of the South Bend River, and a lot of these upstream impacts would be greater than what we might be able to do downtown, for instance. It might be a little bit too little too late, especially when we're talking about these like huge extremes in flooding. So we as a city have a vested interest in the decisions that are being made upstream and helping our communities work together and share information. And I would say the starting point that we're at right now is trying to get better data, and we're really working on our environmental sensing initiative. We're starting with air quality monitors, but I'm actively looking at doing more hydrology sensing and working with some folks in Notre Dame to think about that more strategically. And yeah, so we're definitely thinking about it and trying to move forward.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that too, so as Barbara mentioned, some of the upstream things are opportunities for mitigation, and so we're looking at, is there ways to partner up as a region to be able to make that possible, just because a lot of our land is built up, and so it's hard to be able to mitigate some of that flooding. And so thinking as a region, working collaboratively presents a great opportunity to prevent that flooding before it's too little too late to address here when it hits the city boundaries.
Indiana's shown a lot of resistance also to building wetlands and protecting them. And so there's a policy issue statewide that needs to be addressed there as well. It's challenging to deal with that.
All right, we're coming up to 4:20. I know, so we're a little bit over, but I'm so excited to see that folks are still very interested in our webinar and tuning in. Just want to see if there's any other questions. Maybe we stick around for another minute or two, maybe another question or two, and then we will need to wrap it up. So Barbara, is there any questions in the chat, or if anyone has a question, feel free to unmute and we can answer your question.
Joe Broden had one. What is known about dam control upstream, AEP, which I'm not sure what that stands for, and intergovernmental cooperation prior, during an event relative to this important infrastructure? So I am not an expert on this, but there certainly were some issues with how the Elkhart Dam was managed during the flood, and some contention about whether water should be held back or released from that structure. So it sounds to me like there may be some opportunity for better coordination between the different dams during these events to try to at least know what's expected. But just a thought there.
This is Jim again. Every year, the different dams along the St. Joe River, we receive a copy of an update, and they have a plan together. So we just met with them about 4 weeks ago, and the last time they had, I think it's been 4 years, 5 years ago, they have a huge layout of if the dam does burst, the impact on flooding. So from what we can see, they are being very proactive on what they're doing and how they're doing it. So as I said, we just received a copy of an update of who's who, the policies, the procedures, who their contact people are. So if anybody would like to review that, we have a copy in our office. It's not electronically, not electronic. They do not like to give that out electronically. So if anybody would like to see it, you're welcome to come to our office and review it with us.
All right, thanks, Jim. One more question. We're over time, but I think we'll take one more question and then we'll have to wrap it up here. Any questions in the chat or any lingering questions that feel free to unmute your mic.
Will asked another question in the chat, and one thing I wanted to note on, so Jim made this point about there are plans that are out there, and Willow mentioned that there's this downtown plan happening, and that just highlighting that making all of these plans sort of that they all know about each other and are interactive is definitely something that we are prioritizing, and it's great to be here and share that information together. But Will asked about how there are, not enough swimming pools and splash pads to stay cool, and are there conversations about community amenities and like playgrounds and extreme heat? I can, Alex, I'm sure you can build on this, but I know that extreme heat is something that our folks at VPA are very aware of and think about both for our residents and also VPA staff are out there mowing and out there in the thick of it. So the neighborhood plans I think also incorporate community desires for splash pads and things like that. So those are two sort of examples that I can see. And Alex, if you want to add.
Yeah, and VPA is our venue parks and arts department. So yeah, they oversee all of our parks and our parks, and they do all the events, right? And then they also manage those spaces. I'm Barbara. I think you know a little bit more, and you're more in the weeds than I am on that. But I think in general too is also thinking about like how can we best inform the public of strategies to cope with extreme heat when it happens, right? Or to inform folks of that. We do have sensors that we're hoping to install soon throughout the city, so we have a better sense of some of that granular differences in extreme heat and other things that we're hoping to sense, and that also gives us a better sense of what's happening in the city and how we can communicate that information. But yeah, definitely aspects of that we want to incorporate into the update of our plan of how we can prepare and inform folks so they are equipped to address extreme heat and other impacts of climate when they come up.
I think the biggest challenge is when we have emerging threats which are not commonly associated with this area. So, an extreme heat wave that is on the order of seeing, 45 degrees C in Paris, like that kind of event. We haven't seen that before, and the impacts of that it's not clear. Similar with extreme stormwater flooding. If we have deep water in places where we've never seen it before, people think they can cross, and then they can't. So it's an education process, and I think sometimes it helps to look at in other places and what have they had to deal with, what are the unexpected things that came, and how did they cope with that afterwards. So in 2003, I think, they had the extreme heat wave in Europe, and there was a lot of action that took place to try to make those communities more resilient. So looking at that would be interesting, I think.
Definitely agree, Alan. All right. Well, I think we're at time unless there's one more question, but I think we can wrap it up. We will share this recording on our YouTube channel. That's the City of South Bend Municipal YouTube channel. And again, thank you all for attending. Yes, Barbara put in the chat our Together South Bend page, which is where you can stay up to date on the update to our climate action plan, engagement opportunities as we lay that out. And we hope to populate that page in the coming month or two. So stay tuned on that. And you can also follow us on our sustainability webpage, which is southbendin.gov/sustainability, as well as our Facebook and Twitter page, which has the sustain/SB handle, sustain SB. Yeah, thank you again for attending, and we appreciate your time, and I hope you all have a great day. Thanks again. Bye.